Okay, so what I'm going to be using today is a fat quarter. As you can see, you can buy them pretty much anywhere that sells fabric. They say fat quarters on them. 18 by 21, that's pretty close. They will usually be 18 by 21 to 23, just depending on the fabric. Sometimes they come in little squares, sometimes they come in these little nice rolls. And you're going to want to take the wrapper off. And it's going to be very wrinkled, and so we are going to iron it. So let's get this laid out and get it ironed. Alright, so we're almost done ironing it now. And it's nice and smooth, and you can see it when you open it up. It is a big rectangle, and it's been nicely ironed. So now we're going to use something very important. This is my template. My template I made at 20.5 by 4 inches. 4 inches is the standard you're always going to want for your scrunchie because you're going to bend it in half and stitch the seam down the length. Now you can do 18 inches. I like to do mine 20 if I'm using a cotton. If it's a really thick fabric like polar fleece, you may want to do 18 just so it scrunches up really nicely. So here's my template that I made, and it's just a piece of old cardboard off of a book, and like a workbook, and I tape my pieces together, so you don't have to have anything fancy. But I find that doing this, instead of using my ruler to measure over and over, because you're going to make more than one scrunchie, it's really going to save you some time and a lot of frustration. Okay, so as far as cutting goes, you can use traditional scissors, or you can use a rotary cutting mat and a rotary cutting tool. These are wonderful if you're going to do a lot of them. I've had mine for years. As you can tell, it's got some wear and tear. They are an investment because they're not cheap, but they are worth it 100% if you're going to do straight line cutting a lot. It will save you so very much time. So what I have done is I have put my template down right here, and because these are scrunchies, the seams aren't going to show. You can use tailor's chalk or markers or whatever you want, but I like using just a number 2 lead pencil. It really works well. As you can see, the lines show up nice and visible, and they're not going to show anywhere because we will have all of our seams inside. Now if you're using a thin white fabric, you probably don't want to use pencil because it will show unless you trim off the pencil stitching or pencil sketching. And but other than that, don't spend your money on markers or anything that's specialty. Just use a pencil. All right, so now we've got, I'm going to do 2. So as you can see, I've done 1, and then here's my second one right here, all the way down, and we're going to cut it across. Now this is the selvage. You can see the little bitty dots. This is where it was hooked to the machine when the fabric was being woven in the factory. So don't include this unless you absolutely have to, because if you look really closely right here, this part is woven differently, and anytime you're doing a project, if you wash it after it's made, this piece is going to shrink differently than this because the threads have been woven tighter. So you want to avoid using this if possible, and because we're doing it all the way to here, when we cut it, all of this will just be left over, and it's only about 2 inches, so it's okay for that to go into the bin. So let's get this cut. One cut right here, and just a reminder, if you've not used these before, this is a round razor blade, so please be very, very careful with them. You can do yourself quite a bad injury. So we're just going to, trying to keep in frame while cutting with a hand. Just gonna cut, and it doesn't have to be like super, super precise because it's a scrunchie. So we've cut down, and I think I've got a little dull spot in my blade. Yeah, my kids got a hold of this and used it for paper, which, as we all know, should never do. It will destroy your blades. But they're easy to replace. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. You can just cut that little spot, and there it is. Look how fast that was. We cut a whole strip while I was talking and holding my phone. So we have our strips ready. Let's go on to the next step. Okay, so now the next step is we're going to iron 1/4 of an inch to a 1/2 inch under. So we have wrong side out, or wrong side up. That's the side that's not super printed, because if you look, there's your right side, this is your wrong side. So we're going to bend this over and we're going to press it with our iron. So here it is, we've got our edge pressed under, and that's going to be our finished edge when we are sewing our scrunchie all the way back together. So now we're going to turn it over to the right side, okay, and we are going to bend it lengthwise. We're going to fold it, we're going to match our edges up so they're nice and even, and we are going to put pins in it. And we have pins. Now all we did was fold it together, meet our edges together. Mine's not perfect because I was cutting with one hand and not stabilizing my fabric, but that's going to be fine. So we've got our pins in, and now it's time to run our seam. This is a tube turner. It has a little hook, and you feed your tube onto this, you hook your raw edge onto this, and then you pull this and it pulls it right side out. Another way to do it is to take a safety pin and pin it onto the edge, and then go push your safety pin down into it and pull it right side out. So I've done that, and here is our finished tube. Okay, so that's the part I rolled and I ironed. So to roll it, we want to grab the seam just right there and just kind of rub it against the ironing board a little bit so it gets your fabric just kind of back there, and you just kind of work with it and get your seams to where you can see there's my seam. And then we're going to take a straight pin and we're going to stick it into the part that we rolled. We can just take our iron, it's set on cotton, we can iron it. Now, you don't have to iron this part if you don't want to. It'll be a little more floofy if you, it's a technical term, a little more floofy if you don't iron that part down. But we're just going to roll our seams and get it ironed out. Now, if you don't want to use straight pins, you can roll, hold it, put your iron down onto the fabric, and then just go to the next one. But I'm just using the straight pins to kind of demonstrate how to keep it all in place. So you can choose whichever method works for you, of course. And let's get this seam pressed out all the way. And now it's time to put our elastic in. Now, I have two different types of elastic. I always use 3/8 inch elastic. This is the knit non-roll, and then this is just braided. They stretch a little differently, but not enough to really make a difference. So what I use is a 7.5 inch piece. Now, if your wrist is bigger than a standard ponytail elastic, you'll want to go with maybe 8 to 8.5 inches. If you're doing this for a little bitty, then you may want to go with just 7. But 7.5 is a standard hair elastic and what goes inside of a store-bought scrunchie. So as you can see, we have our hook from our turning tool right here, and we're going to hook the elastic onto the hook, and we have all of the tube fed on, and there's the hook at the bottom that we're going to pull. So we're going to get this elastic onto this hook, and then we're going to very carefully pull it through and leave about an inch, 1.5 inches sticking out, and we're going to pin it into place so that it doesn't go right through the tube, because that's where we need it to stay so we can sew it to the other end. Also, be careful when you're pulling this through. You want to make sure that you keep your elastic nice and flat inside, because if it twists up when you put your scrunchie on your wrist like a bracelet, you're going to feel that twisted piece of elastic inside. Alright, so let's get that done. Okay, so we have our starter piece, and as you can see, we've got our straight pin right there holding it in place, and then we fed it through, and then we pinned it into place right here. And you can see how the turner is hooked into it. See, there's the thing from us pulling it through. So we're going to unhook this right there, and we're going to take our 2 pieces of elastic and we are going to pin them together. And after they're pinned together, we can take these 2 pins out. So let's pin that together and remove the straight pins. Okay. So now we have it pinned together. We've removed our straight pins from the sides, and now it's time to put it in the machine. And the reason we removed the pins from the fabric and the elastic is because we need to be able to pull that fabric out of the way while we sew this together on the machine. So we're going to go over to the sewing machine, and I have removed the platform right here out of the way, and so it gives us a nice free arm for sliding our scrunchie on. So we're going to get our scrunchie put under the foot and we'll be ready to sew. Okay, so now we have the doubled over piece of elastic under our presser foot, and we're going to put our presser foot down. We are going to adjust our stitch width all the way up, and our stitch length needs to be between 2 and 3 so that it gives us a nice tight stitch. Presser foot's down, drop our needle down, and our straight pin is right in the center. So our zigzag is going to go over it. So we're going to go, let's see if we line that up a little better. Go over it, and now we are going to remove the straight pin. And now that we've got it kind of tacked all together with that zigzag, we're going to go back over here, do a straight stitch, come over here, we're going to reverse, and go forward again. We want that elastic to really hold. All right, so now let's pull it out of the machine. Whoop. Pull it out of the machine, cut it off, and now it is time to take this raw edge right here, and we're going to stick it into our finished edge. That's the edge that we ironed down in the very beginning. See, it's got that little part stuck in. So now we're going to match our seams up and get it all pinned into place. And I'm going to stick about a 1/2 inch of the raw fabric inside of our finished edge. Okay, so now we have our finished edge overlapping our raw edge, and what we can do is we can just straight stitch over this, and if you do that, make sure your elastic is where you want it to end up. Some people want the elastic on the round edge, some people want the elastic on the seam. It depends on what you want to show on the outside. We prefer our seam showing. That's how my kids like them, so that's how I do them. Now, if you don't want to do a straight seam right here and you want it to be a little softer and a little more round, you can take your needle and thread and you can just whip stitch here and then turn it over and whip stitch here. You can do a running stitch, whatever you want to do. I prefer to stitch them by hand, so let's get that done. Okay, so now you can see where I have gotten my stitches. So now we're going to get it all nice and straightened out, and it will be ready to wear. All right, we've got our gathers evened out. Our hand stitching is done. It's nice and stretchy and ready to be worn. If you've enjoyed this video and possibly learned something, please give us a thumbs up. Thank you.